Hey everybody, welcome back to Keeping Me Up. With you as always, I'm Shane, and the gentleman to my left is Victor. If you watched the premiere episode of Keeping Me Up, you heard his voice, you didn't see his face. So now Victor's joining us live and in person. So say what's up, Victor.
Hey, how you doing, guys? This is Victor. Yes, I was featured. Was that the first episode of Keeping Me Up?
Yeah, that was the very first
All
one.
right. I'm glad I was able to be the inaugural guest on your show, and then I'm glad to be back. Shane and I also do another podcast, Standing Room Only, which I guess is on a little bit of a hiatus because
Well, I
we're
don't know.
not.
I gave up on texting you guys. Do a show this Friday. Do a show this Monday. Do a show this week, and I get no responses back from either you or Ashley. So I'm like, I guess they're just not that into it. So I'm waiting for you guys to ask me when you guys want to do it.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, man. It's just I really haven't been into this baseball season.
Yeah.
We could open up a whole can of worms, but I don't want it to take away from the subjects.
Yeah.
The things that we're going to talk about today.
And the subject is obvious from the background of this episode. Victor and I are rather small in the image. Today is 9/11. And I can't believe it's been 19 years since that day. And just, not to capitalize upon the anniversary, but just to talk about it. Victor and I are both New Yorkers, and we both lived through it in completely different ways, given our age difference. So I figured we could just talk about like where we were and what it was like, and if anyone would like to comment their experiences and what they went through on the day, they can. So I mean, Victor, how old were you when 9/11 happened?
When 9/11 happened, I was 6 years old. So I was in the first grade.
I thought you were being kindergarten.
Yeah.
I was trying
Nah,
to
not
guess it,
kindergarten.
but
I know you joked around saying that I would have been in kindergarten, but first grade, I think I was just starting off my first couple days. But it was, to be honest, I do not remember much from school. Like, I don't remember exactly what happened while I was in school. I kind of just like vaguely remember that I was picked up by one of my sisters, and then from there it was just like everyone turned on the TV, and that was about it. When so I've grown up with three sisters, all of them are all healthy and alive, thankfully. And I remember one of them saying that she went to, so I was in the first grade, but since there was a 7-year difference between us, she went to an intermediate school, or middle school, a couple blocks away. And then my two eldest sisters went to a high school that was also in the area. So like we were all separated off into different schools, but for the reasons of 9/11, we all were in the same area. So I recall, my sister picking me up, and then I was just watching it on TV, and then she told me, she's like, I saw come out of the building when it happened.
wait, what was that?
That?
You broke up for a second. What was that? What was that last part? You saw
I
what?
broke up.
Yeah.
No, I mentioned that while she was in school, she told me, she's like, I saw the smoke from when the plane hit, and from there, like, she imagine that, like, she was all the way in Queens, and she could see this in downtown Manhattan.
Yeah. So
it was wild, this impact that it had. And then I believe with the rest of my family members, I might be mistaken, actually, my two eldest sisters, they were in college, so they actually walked the bridge back because all the subways were shut down. And the same thing for my parents as well.
Or they were in the city, like in Manhattan.
Yeah, they were in the city.
Yeah.
Like, in Manhattan.
For anyone not familiar with New York terminology,
sorry.
no one considers the outer four boroughs, the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, and Staten Island as the city. Those who live in the outer boroughs refer to Manhattan as the city, and specifically Lower Manhattan, or like Midtown to Lower Manhattan. So, if you hear us refer to the city, yes, while technically we are part of New York City in the five boroughs, I was living in the Bronx at the time, Victor and Queens. That's what we mean. So then they picked you up from school.
Yeah, I got picked up from school by my youngest sister, but youngest in the context of my other two. And yeah, she picked me up from school. It was weird, and I just turned on the TV, and it was like you're following the current event. It's like not even the reporters knew what was happening. There was like all these reports going on. Like everyone's worried about their family, their parents, and it was weird. Like now, I think like, what if the same thing happened today? How a 6-year-old would perceive it because they have access to more media tools, whereas my only access, like I don't even think I had internet back then. Like I only had local TV. So for me, it was just like, all right, whatever images are on TV, everyone has seen breaking news events. But now with the way social media is broken out, it's like you get access and so many different vantage points just from that.
That's very true. It's something that it's a completely different world now, and it would. I mean, hopefully we don't find out, but it would be absolutely. It is quite something to think about. To think about how it would be ingested now, like
absolutely.
Because I've spoken to different people who are in school at different age groups, from the very young, such as yourself, to all the different ranges probably of your sisters, and it was weird what they were told at what time, if they were told anything, so on and so forth. And now it would just be, I mean, I don't know how they treat phones in schools. Like I know some schools have like lock boxes outside and trucks and whatnot because they're not allowed in, but someone's going to have one. Someone's going to smuggle it in, and they would all know, and all the pictures will be shared and the video will be seen. And there'd be no shielding kids from it now, as I imagine many kids are probably shielded from on the day of.
Yeah, it's scary because, like, the memories that I have of 9/11 was just everything that I watched growing up, every anniversary. Or I don't know, is it even considered an anniversary because you're not celebrating anything, you're kind of mourning.
I mean, everyone still says it's an anniversary. Yeah. Like, I know next year is going to be particularly somber because it's going to be 20 years, which is... But... not amazing, but
like that's what I recall is seeing all the documentaries, all the footage, and it's just like, and as a kid you kind of fall in through this little rabbit hole, especially like I remember maybe being like around 11, 12 years old when you're huddled with your friends around the computer and you're looking up like conspiracy theories, like, oh, did this really happen? Did that really happen? So it kind of like it shaped a little bit of how I remember as a 6-year-old what happened on September 11th, 2001.
Yeah, is it ultra clear in your memory, or is it's kind of hazy?
No, it's kind of hazy. And sorry if I'm a terrible guest for this podcast.
No, this is exactly what I wanted to learn, was just how people. And then another vantage point would be someone who wasn't alive at the time, but that can be a future podcast. But no, to get that vantage point of someone who was super young and what the recollection is it more about the actual memory, or about like they say, a story just changes in the game of telephone over time, and different influences change your recollection and your outlook upon a certain historical events. So that's what I want to learn about from you.
I do, however, want to mention that, my family wasn't personally affected by 9/11. However, we had family friends that were affected by it. So through, I grew up. My family immigrated from Romania when I was a young kid, so I practically grew up here, but within New York, we began to build a bond of Romanians within the community. So we had this one family friend who's sister/sister-in-law and brother/brother-in-law. They both lost their lives in 9/11, and my mom was best friends with the person that they were related to. I don't know. It's like not her best friend, one of her close friends, brother/sister-in-law, kind of like that combination of a mix. You get what I'm saying?
I do.
Yeah, so they unfortunately passed away, and they were. I remember from what my mom told me is that they were on. Well, the first tower to hit was the North Tower, right?
Yeah, Tower 1 North, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, they worked like on one of the top floors in the North Tower. So for them, once that plane hit, it was almost who knows
Possibly
what was going
instantaneous.
on through there.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anything, yeah, it was instant. And by going, like, we would go to the funerals, or and then not, we went to the funeral, but then we would every year we would go to this memorial service for them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of seeing their grief amplified it for me a little bit more as I was growing up and as I began to understand what happened on 9/11. Because back then, like I said, like a 6-year-old, like I didn't really know what was going on. Like I knew like someone hit the Twin Towers, but
Yeah.
I didn't understand the magnitude of it until every year as I grew older and older, and I began to either learn about it on TV, see the grief happen through other people. So it was a little bit of it was a learning process for me.
Yeah. That's interesting because like I lived through it working, and I'll get into my story about it in a moment.
Yeah.
Being close to the actual events, physically close, but I am blessed to have not known the closest that I know of, and granted, it's been almost 2 decades, so
Yeah.
by now I feel like I would know more. Was a good friend of mine from high school who back then there was Friendster, I don't know, but internet was limited, like you were saying, and no, there was no MySpace yet. There was no Facebook. So it was a friend from high school who, if you didn't still have their house phone, or if they didn't live with their house phone, the house phone changed, you lost contact at the high school. And then we reconnected years later. But years later was when he posted his father had passed away. His father was a firefighter. So, but I didn't really know his dad. So that was the closest connection I had to anyone who died on the day. I'm sure if I look deeper, I know someone who has passed away in the last 2 decades from all the resulting health side effects, which is just the wrong term to use, but the lingering health concerns and issues and diseases and death sentences that so many people who work down there, especially the first responders, have had to endure. But as far as the day of, that's it. But I lived through the day in my own story. So it's interesting that your recollection of it is through time and different exposures to different mediums and takes and documentaries, and then of course most of all this personal these family friends who lost someone, is unique because I knew people who worked down there as part of the relief effort. It's not the same thing. You're going to these memorials, and that must be, this is something I can't understand. Do you still go to any of those memorials, or do you even know if they still have them?
They have them, but it's kept more private and within the family, just because usually, like in our, like as a Romanian tradition, it's the first 7 years since the passing. Like that's when you go to the gravesite and have a bigger type of memorial for the ones who passed away, which includes like extended friends, family, kind of people who weren't necessarily in the circle, and then just as the year goes on, depending on how the family would like to pay their respects, they reduce the amount of people that go. So I'm absolutely sure that the family who's affected by it, they still visit the gravesite and they still have a memorial service for them. But it's not like we're personally invited to go, pay our respects. My family will do it respectfully in our own way.
Okay,
but
I see.
It's still something I keep in my mind, like every time I think of 9/11.
I didn't know that about the Romanian culture. That's it's what's just a little bit off topic. What's the significance of 7 years?
To be honest, I got no idea. It's kind of just like it's like one of those like traditional things I just got used to and grew up with.
Yeah.
Um, maybe seven's a holy number, and it's it pertains to that.
It
But
seems to be a
I
number
wouldn't
that
know.
transcends
Like
cultures.
it's just like one of those things like you do as a kid. It's just like okay, you follow that, you understand, and you kind of move forward with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. I mean, I think it's one of those numbers that kind of transcends different cultures. Being raised with Native American beliefs, I know that the seven-pointed star and different. They're very. I mean, I know 9 is one, but 7 and 9 seem to be two numbers that kind of repeat
Yeah.
themselves in different cultures. I mean, digressing back to the actual topic, I was 21 years old. A kid who didn't know anything. That was a particularly hard year for me. You know, uh, my mother passed away that year on April 6th, and that was a long hospital battle. And then find out the woman I was with was cheating on me, and the whole time my mother was in the hospital. And then,
Wow.
yeah, and then just, you know, it took until about June for me to have my, like, mental breakdown from that, like when everything really impacts you, like, oh shit, my mother's gone, oh shit, my relationship's nothing, and just like this empty void. And I'm not like, particularly close with the Italian side of my family. I've always kind of been, my mother and I were kind of the black sheep. We're a little she was, my mother was a little bit too much a rebel for them. And so what was weird was that I had worked at the what's officially called the American Indian Community House, which I despise that term because it should be Native American Community House, but that's neither here nor there. And so my good friend who passed away last year, Roz Dotson, she knew someone who worked with I forget the name of the company, but it's one of the big companies that manages all these restaurants throughout New York City. And so I worked on Fridays as a bus. I left the community house to work as a busboy at Fridays in Rockefeller Center. I quit after 2 days because it was just it was absolutely disgusting.
Yeah.
And so, but one possible job, had I been a more refined kid with just been more mature, there was a possibility that I would have been assigned as a busboy to Windows on the World, which was the restaurant at the top of Tower 1, with every possibility of being on the morning, the breakfast shift, so to speak,
Yeah.
which is the less busy time, I would imagine. And this was, June, July 2001. And that job, I imagine, I would have stuck with more because I absolutely adored the Twin Towers. My mother always grew up, when I was growing up, she's like, they're so ugly. I prefer the Empire State Building. I prefer the Chrysler Building. Those are works of art. This is just ugly, ugly, ugly. And I think a lot of old-time New Yorkers who... what was that? Did you hear that? You didn't hear that. I heard that. Old-time New Yorkers who... Like the boomer generation were kind of like, oh, these towers are so flat and ugly and there's nothing inspired about them. But then, of course, they became part of your life, and you don't realize how much you missed them till they were gone, which other boomers told me after the fact. But I grew up loving them. So had I been assigned to Windows on the World, I would have loved life and definitely not have left. Thankfully, I didn't get that job. So then the Italian side of my family, after I was unemployed for a while, my cousin Janet, she knew a gentleman who owned a flower shop down on Hudson Street, Hudson and Leonard. It's no longer there now. It's like a real estate outpost or whatever. But it was called Hudson Florals, I believe, and I was working there. I think I started in July or August down there. And it was cool because I'm working in Tribeca. It's like this awesome, like I'm in the city. We had a lot of celebrity clientele, so I always had my camera with me, which back then was a big camera, no cell phone cameras. And it was just, I had no cell phone at the time. And it was just, it was so much fun. And then I lived in the Bronx. My stop was the Pelham Parkway stop for the 2 and the 5. And I used to be in the back car. By the time the train gets to me, there's no seat, so I'm in the back car. And they were the old Redbirds, so they had the window at the back. I could just look out the back and have my Discman on me, and going downtown. And what's really weird is that the day before, on September 10th, I was making deliveries for the flower shop, and we had the delivery van, and we're going down right where 7th and Christopher are. And anyone who knows from back in the day, and even now you can see the current World Trade Tower, they were clear and beautiful as day. And I wish I still had this picture, because I took a picture and it was going to storm that night. And you know that kind of pre-rainstorm where all the buildings turn silver? You get that kind of like weird...
Yeah.
And I...
It's like an aurora.
Yeah. And I said to Bernardo, who was the delivery guy, I was like, oh, it's like the calm before the storm. Which is like, it sounds like a bad movie. And,
Wow.
And so I took this one picture, and it was the last picture I took of it standing, and I wish I had it. They were all printed out. I don't know the negatives. I've moved many times since then. And then on the Redbird the next day, I remember you kind of see them when you turn from 180th to East Tremont on the 2-5 line. And I saw it like out of one view, but I was mostly in the back. Then we get to around 59th, 50th Street, Times Square area, and that's an express train to 2. And I just start seeing 1 trains and 9 trains. This is before they got rid of the 9 train, all backed up, all in the stations and the tunnels. And I'm like, oh, something happened. Usually I would get off 14th Street, transfer to the 1, get off at Franklin Street. But this day I was like, let me go to the Chamber Street and go up 1 station, because everything, I guess because I saw all the 1s backed up and the 9s backed up. So I get to Chamber Street and I just hear like, trains are MTA typical announcing.
Typical announcing, yeah.
And I'm thinking, because you watch like the 9/11 documentary of the firefighters who are actually there with the French brothers, the Naday brothers, I believe is how the Naday brothers. Yeah. They were like, there's always a fire. Something's always happening. It's a huge complex. Something's always happening. So you think, oh, fire, World War I, nothing about it. Get on the 1 train, or the 9 uptown, 1 stop. And I get on, and then I see the next door down, which I hadn't noticed him. A father and his son get on. He's holding his son's hand. Son must have been a little bit older than you, so maybe like 7, 8, 9. Holding his son's hand, and he's white as a ghost. And they say New Yorkers are assholes, and sometimes that's true, but several people on the train said, "Sir, are you okay?" And he's like, "I just saw a plane fly into the World Trade Center." Wow. And the train, and there's maybe 10 people in this car, and so everyone heard it. And that's the second we pull into Franklin Street, the doors open, and we hear, which I think was the second plane. Yeah. And so I'm like, holy shit. So Franklin Street, you can't see the World Trade Center because of the way the street, Church Street turns. Mm-hmm. So I run to Leonard Street, and I run, Leonard Street, and I run. And it's kind of weird because the world still have like functioning. So some people making deliveries, some people are chatting it up, some people walking with their coffee. And I get to right where it is on Hudson and Leonard, and I look up, and I see the big hole in Tower 1 and then like a tiny hole in Tower 2, which I thought, oh, it must have been like maybe the wing ricocheted off Tower 1 and hit the side of Tower 2. Physically probably impossible, but the way it looked at the time.
Yeah.
Find out a few minutes later, that's...
you can't even comprehend.
Exactly. And so you look at it, and something we all kept saying was, this before they fell, was it looks like Independence Day. Because that was only a 5-year-old movie at the time, and so that was the big disaster movie where we watched cities to get destroyed, and the smoke's coming out, and then you find out, and the way where it is, if you were to go see it in Hudson Leonard, it's still the same windows. They're big, not floor to ceiling, but big windows. So from inside, you can see, and there was construction at the time, so we were kind of like on the sidewalks, so we were kind of like isolated from the rest of the world. And when we turn on 1010 Winds on the radio, and that's when you start thinking, oh, an accident has turned into the apocalypse. And it sounds funny now because it's 2 decades later and we all know the line of events. But when you're in it, you think, this is it. It's done. I'm probably done. Because then you start hearing that the Pentagon was hit, and then you start hearing that at the time they said that they thought the Capitol had been hit because someone apparently there was a fire on the steps of the Capitol. Then you hear that a plane was brought down somewhere in Pennsylvania. Then you hear, because at the time you're hearing that it was shot down in Pennsylvania. Then you're hearing that there's 10 planes unaccounted for. They're all hijacked. Avoid all landmarks in all cities, especially New York and D.C. So you're hearing those things as you're watching people die because, and I had pictures. I don't have them. But they're microscopic on film. You just see the fire.
Wait, you still have these images?
I don't. I may have some somewhere, but I gave them at the community house. They were doing an article on it, and I gave them the story. I gave them the pictures for them to, I guess, scan at the time or make negatives out of, whatever the technology was in the day. And I never got them back. So.
Wow, dude.
But they were.
I would have been like, dude, I would have loved to, I would have wanted to see those images and repurpose them.
I wish I still had them. I'd put them up on screen, but.
Wow.
And it's like I'm in that mix between like wanting to take pictures and document it, and then also not wanting to do that. But you see the windows go from above the impact of Tower 1, and you see them just turn orange, like dominoes. You just see them going orange, 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 and as the orange gets closer to the edge of that tower, to that side, I guess that would be the west side of the tower. More, I counted at least, I don't remember the exact number, but at least 35 people that I watched jump. And you're seeing these people, and you're just close enough that you can kind of make out their skin color, or if they had long hair, short hair. If it's a man or a woman, you can definitely tell. Some people jump with their hands together. They went together. Some people, you can tell they regretted it and immediately started fighting it. And you're speechless. And so I called.
I'm speechless right now.
Yeah, it's weird. I can't
even imagine seeing that, man.
Yeah, it was.
Dude,
it was something. It was. I don't even know the terms to use because nothing really does it justice, and it's also something that I'm very much aware is like, look what Beirut has just gone through with the explosion. Look what so many people in the world go through. And it's their daily lives to see so much death. But at the time, especially here, it's like, I grew up in the Bronx. I've been at gunpoint. I've been at knife point. I've gone through some stuff. You know, I've seen people shot. I've seen people killed. But it's a different scale. At the time, it was a different scale, a different caliber, a different impact of what was happening. No pun intended impact. Anyway, so I called two people. And I called two people in a way to say goodbye, because at that point we don't know, we're all convinced instinctually that we're not going to survive the day. So I called Kika, who was my mother's best friend, who's like a second mother to me, and she's out in Jersey, and she's like, don't worry, you're far enough away, you're okay. I'm like, no, I'm not working, because the community house is up by Astor Place. So she's like, okay, he's far enough away. She thought I was still working there, and I'm like, no, I'm actually working like 6-8 blocks away. And I hear silence for a second, and she's like, "You're still gonna be fine." So it was like, oh shit, that's the moment she started worrying. And I called Balls, my best friend Balls, and who anyone who watches this, that's who I did the Bill and Ted review with, and he had just woken up, and so he's like, dude, you know, just be safe, and we're talking. I'm like, if I don't make it, you know, I love you, bro. Like, and he's like, you're gonna be fine. But of course, he's worried because he's watching CNN and he's seeing all these reports of all the other planes coming to hit us. And then I called Kika back, and that's when I felt the ground shake, and I hear a collective gasp. Because at that point, the streets are filled, thousands of people on the street, just thousands of people. Some with telephoto lenses, some just watching. There's no cell phone cameras, so like people are just standing there with their mouths open. And I hear from the back room where the phone was, where I couldn't see it, 1,000 people. It sounded like 1,000, like Obi-Wan said in Star Wars, 1,000 voices cried out at once. And I was like, I gotta go. Something just happened. I run back. I go, what happened? And this woman who kind of worked with us, this old, like one of those Upper West Side but Tribeca women, just goes, it's gone. And I get to the window and I see Tower 2's gone.
Dude, this is like the thing I would see in a documentary, and you lived it.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
can't believe that.
nowhere near as close as other people. You know, this is a very kind of on the fringe
I
experience.
know, but
And and then you just stand there going, well, and she's like, do you think people? She says, and she, you know, because people are in shock. She's like, do you think people are okay? And me and some of the other coworkers like, I was shocked that that this is not to demean the number, but I was shocked in the resulting days that only 3,000 people died and only, what is it, 2,800 in New York City died.
yeah,
Because when that thing fell, I was like, I didn't know that it just like kind of imploded upon itself. I was like, I thought, because I didn't see it, I thought maybe it fell, like obviously fell, but
yeah,
like outwardly, and that it
yeah, it
crushed.
toppled over.
What could it? What buildings? What people? What cars could it have crushed? I expected millions, at least tens of thousands, and maybe not millions, but tens of thousands. I expected, and then we're just standing there waiting for Tower One to fall. Because at that point, you're like, well, if that fell, that's gonna fall, and you start seeing it sway the top maybe 30 stories, and the metal curl. And I remember it had been a while since anyone had jumped, because I think they were all gone at that point. And then someone clearly took a running leap because he went further than most. He jumped, and then the tower followed him down. It was, and sometimes when I watch documentaries, I can see that person jump before it falls if they go back just like 5 seconds earlier. And it felt like the tower followed him down. You see the antenna go down, and then from my vantage point, if the camera's me, it was like this almost like pylon of the lower tower was still standing, and then it just crumbled and disintegrated away. And we're like, what do we do? And what's funny, what's stupid is that someone called the floor shop. I'm still having my meeting. Where are my flowers? We're like, dickhead, look out the window. He's like, what? It was an accident. He was so angry. We're like, fuck you. And we hung up. And the second, almost, it felt like the second. It was probably a couple minutes after the second tower fell, or Tower One fell. The one that fell second. That's when all of a sudden the armed forces were in the streets in Tribeca. People head to toe, the helmet, the goggles, the masks, the gloves. You couldn't tell what. You could practically. I couldn't tell if they were man or woman, black, white, or any ethnicity, because they would just cut and they just go, move north now. Grab your shit and just move north. And we moved north. And actually it was a Walkman, not a Discman. Or maybe it was a Discman. Anyway, I had a radio on my Discman. So I'm listening to 1010 Winds as we're going up. And that's the first time I recall hearing the name Osama bin Laden, maybe an hour later. And as you're walking north, St. Vincent's was still there, and we didn't walk quite on 7th. We kept on Hudson up to 8th. And when we're on Hudson, there's one guy covered in soot, covered in other people's blood, holding his briefcase, full suit. And we're like, everyone's like, sir, are you okay? Okay. And he's in shock, and he's always like, this is Hudson. Like, yeah. Hudson turns into 8th. Like, yeah, can we help you? The Port Authority's on 8th. So he was just kind of an autopilot to go home. And then, we tried to get a glimpse of St. Vincent's, but there was like very little action going on, and it was just cars racing, and they're like, stay away from the Empire State Building, stay away from Grand Central, stay away from every point of interest. And we just walked, tried to stop at a friend's house. They weren't home to get some. I hadn't eaten that day because it was the first thing in the morning. I just had water, and it was a nice day. It was a beautiful day. Like the rain the night before, whatever. It was a picture perfect day. And we're walking. We finally get a taxi around Hell's Kitchen, but a lot of taxi drivers, not to profile, but especially back then, were a lot of Sikh taxi drivers. And ignorance says, Sikh? Oh, that must be Arabian, that must be Muslim, that must be Middle Eastern. And they were terrified, rightfully so, because how many got dragged out of their cars and beaten? How many got their windows smashed in? And we had what I believe to be a Sikh driver stop, and it was me and like a Latin guy a very flamboyant homosexual Latin guy, and myself, and actually by that time it was just the two of us, I believe. And he could kind of tell we weren't going to like hurt him, so he's like, I'll take you as far as I can. So actually it wasn't Hell's Kitchen, it was I think we got around 50. We went up all the way up to Central Park, crossed over 59th Street, and because he lived in the Upper East Side and I lived in the Bronx, and then we got the car around maybe 6th Avenue, 59th, and it took us up to his place in like the 80s. And then I walked to the 3rd Avenue or Willis Avenue bridge, and I remember being like, just want to get across the bridge. And it's a tiny bridge, and no one's hitting the Bronx. But that's when I started hearing planes again as they were landing, I would imagine. And then walked up to the Jackson Avenue stop on the 2 train. I saw that the trains were running again, at least uptown. Got on a train, was able to go home, and proceeded to vomit because I hadn't eaten anything, and I'd walked all that way, and it was just heat exhaustion, blah blah. But that was my day, and then didn't go back to work for a week, and then going back, and the aftermath was horrific because you had to show several forms of ID and proof that you worked or lived past Canal Street. Had to walk from the east side on the 5 line by Brooklyn Bridge to the flower shop, and it felt like the aftermath of a war zone, and as weeks turned into almost a month, you stopped seeing real recovery. You started just seeing, like we saw now with COVID, the refrigerator trucks, the morgue trucks.
Yeah.
That was sobering.
That's mayhem.
And but then you wore masks like we do now, but that was because of the air quality was so bad. And it took me 10 years to stop every few breaths having to be, because I breathed in some of that. Nowhere near like others, thankfully. But and then you start smelling raw burning flesh because there were still bodies burning because the fire burned for weeks, months. And so it's all this, and eventually I actually got bronchial pneumonia from the air quality, and I quit the job. And thankfully, it appears that that's the only lingering effects I have because I was far enough away. But that was my day. And it's a story that back in the day, the first 5 or so years, everyone tells their 9/11 story in a new job when you're meeting someone. Where were you? And it's a story you don't tell that much anymore. So it's
Dude, that's unbelievable.
It's amazing. I remember as much of the details as I do.
I said I can't believe you lived through that. That's like, I don't know, especially like I'm trying to imagine myself in my young 20s being at Ground Zero. Well, now we refer to it as Ground Zero, but in the World Trade Center, and just seeing all this happen.
Yeah, it was. I mean, you have no choice but to go through it. You know, and in the time you're sure you're not going to make it, and now it seems a little silly that we all thought that because now we all know what the extent of the events were that day. And of course, Hannah's going to make her cameo. She heard Uncle Victor's voice, but
that's.
But I mean, now in retrospect, you go, okay, that's exactly what it was, and that's what you went through. But in the moment, people are, and we saw it throughout 9/11 and in the resulting events following that, and everyone, whether you're in your 6 years old, 21 years old, 100 years old, you're resolute, and you get through it. Something kicks in, and you live through it, and you process it.
Instinct.
Yeah. You process it.
Try to survive.
Right, Hannah?
Man, dude, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
This is a new day for me to really learn.
I mean,
yeah. But like my story, not to say that it has no value, but it doesn't even compare in the level of trauma that you went through.
Yeah, I mean, look, all stories have value to them. You know, you going through it. I had the benefit of being able to know what was happening when it was happening. And I'm one of those people that doesn't like to be in the dark about things. And I want to know as much as I can while going through it. And to be a 6-year-old in school and having, I can imagine what was this like off feeling that like things aren't quite going the way the day normally goes, and what are people doing?
Yeah.
And that's an experience because you live through the time, but you have this certain view, and your memory of it is shaped by.
But see, my memory
by
is shaped by
retellings.
stories like yours.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Whereas I had the benefit of having had my specific memory of it, and then finding all this other stuff afterwards. So it's always unique and fascinating to hear about different individuals of all. Okay, Hannah, stop hitting the mic, baby girl. I love you. Of all different,
Yeah.
stories.
I mean, every New Yorker, especially living in New York at that time, has their own story to tell.
Yeah.
It's It's sad, man. Like,
Yeah.
it, you know, tomorrow's gonna be the 19th anniversary, and it's almost not that we become immune to it, but it's like we've been conditioned to be like, oh, it's 9/11,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like, I don't want to speak for everyone else, but for me personally, it was kind of like 10 years after September 11, 2001. That's when it really that's when it was very, very relevant. Not to
Mm-hmm.
say that, in 2020, when we have the memorial for it, it's not going to be relevant. But I feel like New
It was
Yorkers have been
immediate.
able to build,
Yeah.
yeah, like New Yorkers have been able to kind of understand what happened. They've had enough time for them to really cope with
Mm-hmm.
the situation of those who have been affected, and at this point, you kind of just what's the right way to say this? Is just you pay your respects. That's about it.
Mm-hmm.
You pay your respect, and
Yeah.
you realize how fragile life can be in
Yeah.
a situation like that. Like, when people, like, back in when 9/11 happened, the following year my parents flew to Romania, and they flew right around 9/11, like those dates, like 10, 11, 12, and they said no one was on the plane.
Yeah. No, people didn't. People didn't go to work
Like,
the first few years on the
Yeah.
anniversary because they were afraid of an anniversary attack.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was very.
But
Yeah.
but 2 years ago, when I went to Romania in 2018, the plane was full of people.
Yeah.
And I remember having my plane ticket be like, oh wow, like I didn't realize that I bought the plane ticket on September 11th
Mm-hmm.
until it was September 11th.
Yeah. It's Pearl Harbor. It's these dates that are very immediate to the generation it happens to, or the generations that it happens to, those who are living through it. It's the natural course of things. I know some people don't want to hear that, and some people it's an offense to, but I don't mean it as such. It's just we do process it. We do move on while hopefully respecting most of all the lives of those innocents who were lost, and like Pearl Harbor, we know it. I mean, the date of Pearl Harbor isn't known by everyone because it's not referred to as the date. 9/11 is pretty easy to remember as the date, but it's there, and we know it. D-Day is there, and we know it, but it isn't. Resulting generations are not going to hold it in the same reverence as this generation does, as those living through it 20 years ago
Absolutely.
and we process it, and it becomes like another day to us. And I know it's hard for a lot of people who lost folks, and I imagine that would be extraordinarily difficult for me if it was just another day to the world. Right or wrong, somewhere in between, just part of how we cope as humans, then whatever it might be. But it's like Pearl Harbor now. It's a day that we live through. It's a day we live with, and at the location they pay their respects. And in New York, they still interrupt all programming to show it'll be interesting to see. I started the episode saying today's 9/11 is because we pre-recorded this. Today's 9/10 for us, but it's 9/11 when you're watching, which is why I introduced it that way. So tomorrow, though, in factuality, it'll be interesting to see what the ceremony is. I know because of COVID, it was canceled, then back on, and different organizations are handling it. But either way, we still cut into programming in New York to show the reading of the names and the bells ringing, and that's still done. But I think to a lot of other folks who weren't here, it's like Pearl Harbor. It's another day, but at least it's always going to be a day that's historical, and there's really not much more we can say about it. At least as far as our own personal takes on it goes. So, I know, Victor, you and I share the same sentiment, our love and our hearts and our thoughts to everyone who lost someone, who is still going through the battle, such as the first responders and everyone who has suffered and lost in all the events that came about because of 9/11, because the day that changed the world. So, unless you have anything else, Victor, I love you, brother. Thank you for sharing your stories.
I love you. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Dude, I'm like like I mentioned before, I didn't even know this part about you, and we talked about so many things.
We do.
And I'm still just trying to wrap my mind around it and like really understand the feelings that you've experienced, and I'm just trying to process it now. So I appreciate you sharing that with me.
Well,
I mean, look, listen, I know you said this is pre-recorded, but maybe you could have another guest and figure and get their telling the story as well. And
yeah, I mean, I would love to have someone like a first responder or something.
You and I aren't the only New Yorkers that live through it, so
no.
everyone's got their own story for it. Like I mentioned, my sisters, they walked the bridge. My parents, they walked the bridge. Yeah. My sister, she was in school. She saw the smoke from the tower. So, like you said, everyone had their own experience of it. So I guess that's what brings us together as New Yorkers. Yeah. Just like one last thing before we wrap up. It's every time I go to Romania and I tell people I'm from New York, that's the first question they ask me. Oh, what happened on 9/11? What did you do?
Wow.
And I'm just like, I don't like, and I tell them exactly like you said. Like I don't really remember it. I was in school. I was 6 years old. Like how much could a 6-year-old process?
Yeah.
So it's really like my appreciation and my respect for the first responders, the people who lost their lives, everyone affected by this, is just like I understand through each New Yorker's point of view and everyone else's point of view to really, for myself to have a grasp of the impact that they had.
Same, very much same. And piggybacking this now real quick, I remember for a long time, like you were saying, the first 10 years, there was the pre 9/11 New Yorkers and the post 9/11 New Yorkers.
It was still raw. It was still raw.
But I'm saying there were people who were pre 9/11 who lived through it here, and the people who moved here afterwards. But now that's kind of not a thing anymore because so much time has passed.
Yeah,
but it's very much an open wound and will be for many decades to come to those who lived through it and lost folks, individuals, loved ones, and again, like Victor said, our respect to all of them, our love to all of them, and the days surrounding it, and especially on the day, our thoughts are with you.
Absolutely.
All right, Victor, love you, brother. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. This is my right arm. There we go. It's on camera. It's a little flipped, but I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. We appreciate everyone who watched.
I hope to be back on the episode soon.
Yes, we'll do something more lighthearted that time. But
absolutely.
But no, thank you for sharing something of such depth and caliber with me and with the audience and everyone. Tell us what your experience was, and we love you. Thank you for watching, and just be good to each other.